Hi, everybody. I'm here with Lisa Glenn Nobles, CEO and Principal Consultant of LGN Collaborations, where she helps SaaS CEOs and founders reclaim 2 to 4 hours of their day by implementing her proven free method. And with over a decade of experience in operations, team alignment, and process improvement, Lisa specializes in fractional COO and Chief of Staff services that directly improve efficiency, team performance, and revenue growth, often increasing company revenue by 40% on average. But beyond business operations, Lisa is passionate about creating sustainable, values-driven workplaces, especially for women and working mothers, ensuring work supports life and not the other way around. So thank you for coming today, Lisa. It's good to have you.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So right off the bat, I do have to ask you what this free method is, because whenever I hear free, I love free stuff. And how does that
Well,
work for founders?
happy to share. So the free method is really a framework for thinking about how to get things off your plate and onto your team's plate. Most founders hold on to responsibilities, jobs much longer than they actually should. And the reason that they do that is the common refrain, which is, well, it would just take so long to train somebody else to do this. And that's true. It will take some time. Like, that is important to recognize. So we use the free method to talk through how to do that. So the first step of the free method is find. You have to find where you're spending your time and where you maybe shouldn't be spending your time because you're not in your zone of brilliance, right? So, John, for you, zone of brilliance is probably having conversations with executives. I'm going to guess it's probably not like doing your taxes. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I mean, anything to do with the accounting aspect, Patrick handles a lot of that, but it's really just I don't want to be in the weeds with numbers and stuff. You got to maximize your superpower, let's say, or maximize what you're good at, right?
Exactly. So you got to find what you're good at and figure out how you're actually spending your time. So we figure out, John, if you really want to be, any role in the company, what would that role be? So we could play through this with you. If you could be any role forever, you want to be the future role, not necessarily where the business stands right this moment, but in the future, where would you want to live?
Yeah, I think in the whole networking aspect is probably the most enjoyable. Just dealing with people and FaceTime with people is really it.
So the
Closing
business
deals.
development space.
Yeah.
So then what we would do next is we'd say, okay, if you want to be, chief sales officer, chief business development officer, let's look at how you spend your time and see how much of that is truly aligned with that goal. Because kind of like dressing for the job you want to figure out, are you actually spending your time that way? Then we do a process review and a tool review. Those are separate. And I'm sure we'll talk about that during this conversation, but process is different than the tools you're using. Figure out where each one is working well or not working well, then do a training review and a KPI review. So once we've figured out all of that, we can go on to the R in free, which is realign, right? You have to realign your team around what you need to be doing and what they need to be doing. So we'll figure out, what are the actions that need to be taken? Who's going to own those? Who's going to own each KPI? And let's lock those in. And then figure out a check-in cadence and a process for that, right? Because many teams say, oh, well, we don't do meetings. Totally understand. You don't want to do too many meetings, right? But you do need a check-in cadence. So what is that? And then the first E is engage. So we're going to engage the team in actually doing the work. We're going to define the timeline and have checkpoints along the way that we can check in on. And then finally, the last E is evaluate. So we're going to evaluate, did we do the thing we said we'd do? Did we get that time off your plate? And then reevaluate and determine what pivots are needed. So we call it the free method because it spells free, but also because literally anybody can use it. We're not going to gatekeep that. That is just the process. And that's how we work a founder from, hey, this is where you are right now. Maybe your ideal role is chief business development officer, but the reality is like you're doing a lot of work that could be an EA role. You're doing a lot of work that could be a sales role. You're doing a lot of work that could be customer support. We want to over time move you out of that to move you into where you should be.
Yeah, and I can imagine with a lot of this, it's not like an overnight process. Like obviously funding, cash flow all come into play with like being able, like, I would love to snap my figures tomorrow and hire like 5 more people to do things. But
Right.
you got to plan for it, I guess, as the business grows and the needs of the business. So I totally get that. And to your point in the beginning, where you said, founders don't want to let go. I mean, I've seen that working with founders where were hiring a COO, their first COO or their first CMO. And
Bless that person.
it's like the mental battle of, yes, I need that position. And then when they realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to have to let go of all the
Right.
strings that I'm puppet mastering in this company. And it's like a very hard thing for them to do, where I've actually seen it in real time where we place a COO and 3 months later, they're still not trusting them to interview candidates for the roles in operations. Like they're like, oh, let me be part of it, or send the candidates to me first and then the COO
Hmm.
them. So it's a real thing. It's a
It
depending on how
really is.
they are. If they're very type A, it's like game over,
Yes.
man. Like
Yeah.
you're not gonna let go. So if you're able to do that and work with them, it's almost like you're counseling them in a way. As much as it is.
It absolutely is. I have clients who have called me their work priest, their work therapist, their work mom, which I get mom a lot. That was my nickname in high school, so I get that. And you get a lot of time spent saying, okay, where is it that you're feeling like it's hard to let go, right? And that's okay. It's normal. You're not weird. You're not bad. You're not a micromanager, whatever it is that you're worried you might be because you can't let go. You're a founder and you care a lot about this product, this service, this company. And, we want to make sure that it's shepherded in the right way. But I think also getting real clarity on, like, as a COO, what would be the outcome that you want to see from this role? Because operations is in everything you do. It's in every line of business. And so a lot of times it's really easy for it to get kind of murky and for the CEO to think like, well, I don't know what they're doing, or, well, it's just like that special sauce and I can't evaluate it, so I can't really give specifics. And that's where it can get really challenging. And often you'll see CEOs who are like, nope, I'm just not going to let go of that. I'm going to keep that, which doesn't allow for the growth that they want.
So where do you find this problem normally in, like, what stage of company? Is it usually like pre-seed, or like when is the
I
time where
mean,
you're finding your customer base, like, this is when you really need me, this is the best time to bring me in?
I love to work in a pre-seed or early seed round companies. So really in that growth phase. And I have significant ADHD. I didn't realize that I was like a late diagnosis. I was diagnosed when I was 40. And I, absolutely looking back, see that as a kid. But part of what drew me to operations is I can do something different every 5 minutes, right? And a growing company is great for that. So in a pre-seed space, I love to come in and say, let me be your right hand. Let me jump in and be, the second in command, the person that is going to, make sure your vision gets operationalized, but also that protects that visionary time, right? It's really hard to code switch back and forth from visionary mindset to operations mindset. And in a pre-seed company, that's something that's asked of the founder constantly. I mean, it's like, okay, you've got to take care of the tax filings and you've also got to make sure you did this compliance thing. And also the website needs to be updated, right? And all of these things are in the back of that person's mind. When they can pull those out and really be able to focus on the vision, it's amazing how much faster the growth can happen because somebody with an operations mindset is in that space.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I mean, I've seen it ourselves too, with just the amount of projects we've had in the first 2 years of building out the brand and the web presence and everything else. Like, it can distract you. It's like a squirrel chasing shiny balls, right? So I
Yes.
totally get that. What do you think as far as tools? Like, what tools do you recommend for founders in the pre-seed space? Like, what kind of, there's Asana, ClickUp, Monday.com, all
Yeah.
these different project management tools and so on. Like, what do you recommend that's like easy to use? And I mean, there's so many new AI
Yeah.
tools coming out now. It's insane. I can't even keep up.
There are so many tools. And actually, one of the things that we talk a lot with operators when we're doing like operations mentorship is we have tool overwhelm, especially in the project management space. Like the average project manager uses 5.5 tools to manage a project. which is wild. And of course, we're always going to use a variety of tools. Like if I'm working on something and I need a quick design, I'm going to run over to Canva because I'm not a designer. But you need a solid tech stack, and you need to not be constantly adding to your tech stack. Your question was really, what's a great tool? What works well? And I'm going to give you like the worst consulting answer ever, which is it depends. But it does. It
Yes.
depends. And it depends on where the company is at the moment, what they do, and who needs to use the tool the most. But I find mostly in companies where there is a founder and the founder is running project management still, you are in a space where you want to get a tool that works well for that person and whoever are in the two levels beneath them, right? So that person and CEO, chief engineering officer, et cetera, you want those people to feel really confident. If it doesn't work for their brains, they won't use it. They're too busy and they won't use it. And at the point that the top level leadership is not using the tool, that's when you have challenges getting the rest of the team to use the tool. And then it's kind of the death knell off the tool. So I've seen folks who use all kinds of different things. We love to work in Asana and ClickUp. I find that for seed stage teams, pre-seed and seed stage teams, those are the most nimble. You can do a lot of automations. Monday is also a solid option. It tends to be, I find, more an engineering brain that goes for a Monday or a Microsoft project or Microsoft Teams sort of approach. So thinking about, who is on the team, what are their needs, and then being sure that leadership's planning to use it and has a real implementation plan.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. Having buy-in from the new users or the team, let's say, is equally as important, because I've seen in some companies, we're bringing in Workday or bringing in all these new, these brand new, they sound great. Like for me, my bone to pick is with like Salesforce, where every sales company is like, oh,
Yeah.
we got to bring in the best. Let's bring in
Right.
Salesforce. They bring in Salesforce, it becomes data entry force where everyone's just typing in, and then the users get a bad user experience, for example, they stop using it, and then your whole management time is spent on compliance, where you need to enter your
Exactly.
data. You need to enter your CRM or ATS data or whatever it is. So if you don't have everyone saying, yes, I like it, and it makes my life easier, as opposed to, oh, this is a burden and it's taking up my time with data entry and I'm not enjoying using it. It's a clunky platform, whatever it may be. And not to throw, Salesforce under the bus, but that's just an example of a very robust system that may not be what's needed for a
The
simple
right stage.
process.
Absolutely.
So I can emphasize with that in terms of like, okay, we're trying to overcomplicate things. So that's why I tried out, for example, in sales, like something like Pipe Drive, which was very basic, so basic, but
Mhm.
what people were using. You get
Right.
people to use it. So I think, having the buy-in is so important. And sometimes that's half the battle as opposed to like, do we have all the functionality?
Yeah. Well, and especially in this world of AI, right? We've gotten really into all of the bells and whistles, like, oh, we can get one that, also will make your lunch. And it's like, okay, but do we really want a tool that makes our lunch? Like, do we actually need that? So I think evaluating what you truly need in a tool versus what would be cool. A lot of companies are selling right now based on what would be cool, and the core features maybe aren't as solid. Also, there is always the option of knitting together several lighter weight tools at a lower level in the company. So you don't need an enterprise solution when you're pre-seed. You just don't. And you probably should not go for it. It's not going to be cost effective. To your point, it can become, really onerous in terms of data entry. So it's much better to go with something lightweight and then scale as you go. And that's one of the things we like to talk about is as a growth partner, we're going to recommend what works for you now. If you're at 50 employees now, what you have right now is not going to be what you have at 300 employees. It just won't be. And that's okay. That's not a sign that you chose the wrong thing. It's kind of like looking at your 4-year-old and saying like, well, why don't your baby clothes fit anymore? Well, they just don't fit. Like, I'm not going to force the 4-year-old to put on the onesie, just like I'm not going to ask a seed stage team to use a tool that doesn't work for them or that will work for them in the future. So you kind of have to engineer based on the stage that you're in.
Yeah, I've totally gotten into the whole scope creep thing where we're looking at some AI tools because I'm always looking at new tools every week.
Yeah, they're fun.
And it's fun. It's you play around with it, you're like, oh, look what this can do, and it can do this and this and this. That's so cool. But then you take a step back and you're like, wait a minute, I just need to do X. Y and Z is nice, but it has to do X really well. That's all I really need. And Y and Z also cost double the price.
Right.
Why pay for that extra bells and whistles where it sounds initially good in the first sales pitch or the demo, but once you start using the tool, you're like, yeah, but I really am not going to ever do all these extra things it can do. So I can appreciate that. I've seen that in real time, like when I've tried out, like, because I brought in so many new AI tools into the company to try them out,
Yeah.
always trying to find ways to just make things more efficient. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's actually making me less efficient because I'm now using 5 different tools instead of just one that's bare bones. And like
Absolutely.
not thinking about the time aspect, the opportunity cost of time, I think is the biggest one
Mhm.
where, you're as a founder, you got, how many hours you want to work. I mean, Elon Musk, you can work 80 hours or 100 hours a week. For me, I like to keep
Right.
around
Good for you if that's what you're going to do. The rest of us like sleep.
Yeah, like to sleep, and we have kids to raise, so there's times you got to be there. So you got to manage your time. I think that's key. I
Absolutely. Yeah,
appreciate
we can't implement everything, and it really is that visionary founder mindset that tends to be like, cool new idea, this could revolutionize things. And it's often the role of the ops person to say, you're right, that's super cool. Let me evaluate it and see if it would really save us time. If it would really save us time, let's do it, right? But a lot of the time it doesn't actually save us time. It's just an extra cool bell or whistle, or there's an AI add-on to the existing tool that will do 95% of what you're wanting, in which case go for that.
Yeah, no, I've totally seen that in real time with some of our trials we've done. So surprisingly enough, a lot of the ones that got me the most excited in the beginning were the ones we never actually even signed up for because it was a nice to have. But then when you got the free trial, I didn't even use it. I didn't use it. I
Yep.
was like, yeah, it just sounds good. So, what are some of the problems that you're finding when you're going to these companies? What is standard? Like, if you had to list like the 5 common problems in a pre-seed or new startup, what are the 5 major operational issues you're seeing, like almost on a regular basis, where you're like, oh, this again? You're almost eye rolling
Yep.
because you're like, I saw this yesterday in another
Absolutely.
company. Yeah,
No, not hard to come up with them quickly. I mean, I think the first thing that I always see is coordination, organization of resources. So we work specifically with remote and distributed teams, and many companies have gone that direction. It is wonderful. I think there are so many benefits to that, and I'm sure we can talk about that a little bit. But one of the challenges is all of your resources are in this box that sits your laptop, right? And you have to find them. And a lot of companies, when people come in, there are no instructions for how to find anything. So the analogy I like to use is those of us who are of a certain age. John, I'm sure you're much younger than me, but we might remember that we used to file things in like physical file drawers, right? And you would go into the office and there would be a file drawer. And often there was even a piece of paper taped on the front of the file drawer to say like how to file things in that drawer so that everybody could find them. Because you couldn't just stuff papers in, nobody would ever be able to locate them again. But that's what we do with our digital resources. We have a drive that is just full of things. And, if you're in, let's use Google Drive as an example, you have things in your personal drive, but you also have things in your shared drive. And in the shared drive, maybe they're not organized at all. There are no naming conventions, there are no folder conventions. And so when you bring on a new hire, they're looking around like, what the heck? I mean, it's like you've given them an office full of file drawers, but there's no rhyme or reason to what's in every file drawer. So that's probably the first one, is lack of organization and sort of coordination of their, whether it's their data or how they do things. The second one I would say is how they communicate. So what's the clarity of the communication? Is it clear? In remote teams, I actually believe that most remote teams communicate more clearly than in-person teams, because you don't have time to walk by somebody's desk and be like, hey, can you just clarify that for me? And you start to feel like, kind of the weirdo when you constantly have to ping your boss and be like, hey, can you jump on a quick call? Like, I have more questions about that. So you get better at that. But what is the clearest way to communicate about, what am I expecting you to do? When do you have to have it done? What does done look like? It's rare that those three come together initially. What's the cadence of communication? So how often are we checking in? What do check-ins look like? Do we meet as a whole team? Do we meet as departmental teams? Do we meet as one-on-ones? And then, sort of the culture within that communication. What are the expectations for how we'll communicate with each other? So I find that that is often not super clear initially. And I'm very much of the mindset that clear is kind. So if we don't have it set out clearly and we haven't agreed to it, we don't have team agreements around how we communicate, we will fail. It will be much harder. I would say probably the third one. I know I'm rambling a bit, so maybe we'll do three and not five. But the third is collaboration. So how do you build collaboration? I hear lots of people now, we're 5 years out of 2020, saying you can't collaborate when you're remote. If that were true, we would have whole companies that were folding right now. Like, obviously that is just patently not true. You
Yeah.
can collaborate remotely, but you have to be strategic and thoughtful about it. So how often do we have a meeting where everybody just gets on and brainstorms? How do we prepare for people who don't think in the moment, right? We have people who process in advance and need to give their collaboration in the moment. And so we need to give them time. We need to give them agendas. What are the rituals for doing that? What are the tools for doing that? And how do we use them? So there's not a clear process for collaboration. And if there's not a clear process, then yes, collaboration is not going to happen in the same way, because it will rely on you jumping in and, doing that in the moment, and your manager knowing how to do that. And not every manager knows how to do that. So I would say those are probably my top three. If I had to give two more, I'd say one is not using a knowledge base. So you have a CRM, you have a project management system, you have a customer service tool. There's no place that knits that all together, and really tells you how to do the things. People always say, oh, well, they'll remember I trained them. And I learned the periodic table. I know I did. If you asked me any question right now about the periodic table and it didn't involve like hydrogen, we'd probably be in trouble. So just because we tell somebody something once doesn't mean they'll remember it. So you need a knowledge base. And then I'd say the other is not having an onboarding. A meaningful onboarding matters even in a pre-seed company. Yes, we want people to take ownership and build their role. A lot of times they're coming into a role that's never existed before, but you can still have a meaningful onboarding, even if it's just, here are the values of the company. These are the areas you're going to work in. These are the people that you're going to be working with. And here's some context and how to find things. Like, that can be a really solid onboarding. So not having an onboarding is a really common challenge operationally.
It's crazy too, and not to diminish the work you're doing, but it's amazing that the basics that are needed are somehow glossed over or completely,
Yes,
like, just like, to me this is like basic stuff, like you should business
absolutely.
101. But yet even the smartest engineers that are making these amazing products and rocket ships and all this, they stumble on like the basics, that like, we need to be able to communicate, we need to be able to collaborate,
Mhm.
we gotta be organized. Like, no kidding,
Yeah.
guys. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes you gotta, I also think it's a maturity almost of like the team as well, of like having some adults in the room that are like, okay guys, like, we gotta have an actual plan here and not just be a firefighter. Because I've seen that in some companies
Absolutely.
where the whole time it's just, you're a firefighter. It's just like, oh, here's a fire, put it out. Here's another, here's three more that popped up, put those out. And you're like running around like a chicken with its head cut off,
Mhm.
because it doesn't seem there's like proper clarity and structure to what they're doing. So
Absolutely. And if you're always
yeah,
fighting a fire, if that's always your mentality, you don't ever get to step back and then make a plan. So there's no fire prevention that ever happens. And it doesn't work that way. But it really does take saying we're not going to run at full speed until we have learned to crawl and then tied our shoes and then walked a little bit, right? Like it takes a process. And I mean, I will tell you, I have family members. It's so funny. Like probably my most vehement referral partners are family members when they start a new job, because inevitably I've had folks who start at like massive corporations, like big companies with names you most definitely know, and they will have no onboarding or they will have no file management system. And they're like, how is this still happening? And to your point, like they're firefighting and they didn't do it early enough in the process that they felt like they could stop and do it. And so they just never did it. And now they're moving so quickly that it's like, yeah, just figure it out. We got to get this done. And that just doesn't work.
yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I've seen that at big companies too. You'd think that they would have everything figured out by then, but it's not the
Sadly,
case.
we're all doing the basics all the time, right?
Yeah, but I mean, hey, do you find that like because you're coming in as a neutral third party that you're able to sort of evaluate these things better, or when you're going in, are you finding that your customers are like, we know there's a problem, come and fix it, or it's like we don't even know there's a problem because we're just so haphazard and disorganized?
It depends on the customer. Sometimes it depends on the maturity and a little bit on the industry, right? So everybody knows their best practices. It's not like, people don't read books, listen to podcasts, et cetera. So they can identify those things a lot of the time. I will say I love having the C word in front of my name. Content opens a lot of minds magically. And it used to be really frustrating to me as an operations person because it was like, I just told you that. Like I tried to tell you that that was what we needed to do. And now I have this magic word where it's like, oh, well, we hired you to do this, so you must be right. But yeah, it's a process. So a lot of times it's, well, the people just are the challenge. And I believe firmly that 95% of organizational challenges are process, not people. And if you haven't fixed the process, you have no business thinking about people solutions. Moving someone or offboarding someone, if you haven't fixed the process for them, that's just silly. So everyone will experience the symptoms in the same way, but they often come to conclusions about what the problem is, right? And I like to say, like, the way we treat a common cold versus tuberculosis are pretty different. We ought to treat them differently. But if somebody has a cold and you treat them for tuberculosis, they might get a little bit better. Mostly they're just going to be annoyed. You're going to be going way overboard. If you treat somebody who has tuberculosis like they have a cold, it's game over. So we have to diagnose the right problem and figure out where it's coming from and then apply the right solutions. And I think that's where the challenge sometimes comes. And it's helpful to have an outside set of eyes because it's very hard to see these things in your own organization. I mean, I find that with my own team. I have a COO for a reason. Even though I do this all the time, she'll see things I don't see.
Yeah, no, it's clarity and having having the right adult in the room to diagnose the problem, the right doctor, let's say, so
Absolutely.
I can appreciate that. And we'll switch gears a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about your practice. I mean, you were telling me, you work with a lot of working mothers and your remote first culture. Like, how has that served you not only through COVID, but to build your business? How's that worked?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think a lot of us saw during COVID that we were forced to move online, right? There was no other option. What was really challenging and also wonderful in COVID was that suddenly you had families who were all working together in the same space. And we all know there were wonderful scenarios there, like, oh, I can get home and I can watch a movie with my kid in the time that I was commuting. There were also some really challenging ones. I mean, I remember my best friend trying to coach her kindergartner while she was doing virtual telehealth visits. Like that was not easy and not ideal. But what we did see with COVID was that the work from home culture was very supportive for parents, not just moms, everyone, right? Like suddenly there was more bandwidth, there was more time not spent commuting, there was the ability to share responsibilities within a household. It was a really wonderful social experiment in that way. Since then, we've gotten back to maybe we'll bring people back in office. And I'm located in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So we are a DC suburb in many ways. And everyone is suddenly being asked to come back into the office. And what that looks like for parents, and particularly for moms, since moms are still really primary caregiver much of the time, is that they are having to figure out childcare that doesn't exist or is exceedingly expensive. They're having to figure out transportation. Maybe kiddos have started school and there's no option for them before or after school. And so, we were chatting a little bit about this beforehand. We have lost a huge number, upwards of 3 million women in the workplace. And it's not because they don't want to work or because they don't have the skills. It's because they cannot work their motherhood into their life as an employee. So on our end, what we started doing is saying, that we have a catchphrase, moms, excuse my French, get shit done, because they do. If you want something done, you can hand it to mom and she's going to get it done while she's making dinner and holding a kid on her hip, right? And so we said, there are amazing women who have project management backgrounds, who have instructional design backgrounds, who have operations backgrounds, who want to be working but need a flexible experience. And most operations work, if we're being honest with ourselves, can happen in the middle of the night when the baby's up for a feeding. So we have committed to working with moms who need flexible work opportunities to do a lot of the work that we do in our agency. And it's been phenomenal. Like, it really is exciting because we can get people who have such amazing talents and capabilities and who are excited to do this work and just need to be able to do it between 9 and 2 because they got to pick kiddos up, or, need to be able to do work early in the morning and late at night. And that works really well for us. It also forces us to have that same hygiene as a, remote distributed team, to be able to say, okay, we've got to be super clear, because if I get to work in the morning and the last person who signed off on the Pacific Coast didn't give me all the information I need, then I'm 3 hours delayed, right? And if I don't start my day going through my inbox and making sure that all of my projects and tasks are handed off to the team, then they get delayed. So we have to have that same sort of clarity and structure as well, which is fun.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I mean, we all lived through COVID, and I remember my twins were like pretty much newborns during the pandemic. So
Ooh.
I had meetings with the national team back when I was with my other corporation I was working with, where I had 14 offices to manage across the country, and they would be literally, my twins would be in my lap in the Zoom meetings with the sales team, the sales managers. So everybody kind of saw them grow up. And it was funny, I talked to an ex-manager that worked under me like 5 years ago, and at this point, yesterday she called me up. She's looking for work now, and she's like, "How are the twins?" I'm like, "Oh, they're in grade 2 now." She's like, "Oh my god, they're so grown up," because she remembered them. So it's cute in a way that you become more family oriented, or you become flexible in the sense that everyone kind of had to go through that shared experience in COVID. But it seems like all the learnings everyone had through that has now gone the wayside, because now there's a hard push for return to office, right? And so, as you said, a lot of working moms have lost their jobs. It also, obviously, as a working dad myself, like, I can say it's been very stressful for everybody if you're having to try to manage pickups and drop-offs with multiple schools and so on with kids, so that you can get back in time to work and so on. So
Absolutely.
having some flex or a hybrid approach is helpful for many people. I've had that conversation actually during COVID with someone where they were like, because we were an essential service, people had to go in office, where they had to actually quit their job. They said, listen, if I work, I have 2 kids that would be in daycare. The cost of daycare exceeds
Absolutely.
my paycheck, or maybe I'd take home $500. For $500, I'd just stay home and raise my kids myself. Why would I want someone else raising them where they're going to get sick and bring disease and all sorts of other stuff? And I want to be home with my kids if I can.
Yeah.
Right? So I totally empathize with that. It's been pretty wild. And that's why you're seeing so many people applying for these remote jobs. You post a job online.
Absolutely.
I've heard of 3,000 to 5,000 applications for remote jobs.
Well, it's also why you see companies saying remote and then not actually being remote, right? And there's always this like coy response like, "Oh, well, what we meant was." It's like, "No, what you meant was to get all of the best applicants because that's who wants remote jobs." And it's totally I understand there are many industries that need to be in person, right? Like I like to see my doctor in person if there is something that I need them to check out. That's important. But just like when it was COVID and it was good for all of us to have this new practice, almost always when a business practice is supportive to one area of a business or one population within the business, like parents, it's actually more supportive for everybody. It's rare that we make an accommodation for a particular population that it doesn't also benefit other people. And I understand a lot of what companies are talking about these days. I certainly understand there are economic factors in city centers, et cetera, but remote work is still a great opportunity for us to keep phenomenal workers in the workforce. And I think particularly when it comes to women, we have seen research over and over again that supports the idea that remote work is the best way to keep women in the workforce.
Well, not only women, I'd also say people that are neurodiverse or introverts that need their time
Yes.
to recharge, that don't do well in a packed office setting or
Mhm.
where there's a lot of, like audio stimuli.
Stimulation.
Yeah, they like
Absolutely.
really quiet place. Like I remember back in the day, I was applying for a job and they wanted all of us to work in an open concept office in pods. And for me, that was like a nightmare. I'm like, I want to be able to go in a closed office and not be distracted by all these noises to focus
Yeah.
on my job because that's how I work best in, silence, not in like the, you know, gossip that's going around and people talking
Right.
and stuff. Other people like that. They love the chaos. They love
Mhm.
but that's not for me. So it was, and there was no choice. They're like, no, this is how
Right.
we're doing it. We believe it's better for everybody to be in the sales floor, right? So this is where, like, if you're a little bit neurodiverse, or even if you're an introverted person, where you're like, yeah, I need my energy, time to recharge a little bit. That day at home once a week is nice to
Absolutely.
recharge a little bit from the all the meetings and everything, and I can really focus. Everyone works differently, just like we learn differently and so on. And I feel
Mhm.
like the one size all factory approach to work, which we had in the 1900s, let's say, building those Ford T models back in the day, like we've sort of kept that mentality, and
Absolutely.
it's hindering our growth, I think, in some ways, where think people have different needs and we have to kind of accommodate them in the workforce, such as
Yeah, we've
others and so on, right?
absolutely. We have absolutely created a workforce where it works for one group of people, which is, as you mentioned, very neurotypical, usually outgoing, extroverted, who have resources to be able to get into the office, who can live near the office, right? Who are not caregivers, etc. Again, when we construct a workplace that works for everybody, we get a much better outcome. And of course, there are always going to be, somebody's going to say, well, you can't construct a workplace that works for everybody. What works for me isn't what works for you. And that's true. But one of the things that has really influenced my practice as an ops practitioner is my time as a teacher. And as a teacher, I never wanted to give the same options to every kiddo because I knew that wouldn't work, right? I had kids who were reading at a ninth grade level and at a second grade level in the same classroom. So they weren't going to be successful reading the same book. That was just the reality. So we gave them options. Options are still available for your workforce, they just require planning. And that's where it can be challenging for companies, right? Because you do actually have to plan in advance. And when we're firefighting, when we're going so fast, we're trying, to maximize everything and 10x everything. It can be really hard to do that, but it is critical because to your point, John, I mean, even within the neurodiversity community, you and I clearly have very different experiences because I love to go into a crowded office where everybody's talking. I'm the person who in college studied in the cafeteria.
Oh,
And
okay.
I totally recognize that you would have hated that and you wouldn't have done well at all. Should I have to go to the library if that doesn't work for me? No. Should you have to go to the cafeteria if that doesn't work for you? No. We have to figure out good options for everyone and be flexible enough as employers to be able to say, okay, I can make that happen. Let's figure that out.
Yeah, and from a recruitment standpoint, switching a little bit to recruitment, like by having a more inclusive workplace, and we're not talking about going the whole DEI route, which is very political right now. We're talking about being inclusive to allow multiple different people to enjoy and be feeling belonging at your workplace. Having an inclusive workplace, by doing that, you're also attracting better talent because
Absolutely.
if I, for example, when I'm interviewing with a candidate and we tell them, yes, you're going to have to go work in a sales floor with all the sharks and you're going to be on top of each other and it's a hustle and bustle culture. People don't like that. Some people may not like that, right? And so not for me, no thanks. I want a remote sales position, right? That I've heard that before. Or I want to be able to be hybrid because personal reasons, kids and
Absolutely.
activities and so on. Everyone has their preferences besides just salary. And I mean, obviously, money is obviously a main component, let's say, of people's motivations, but the culture, the workplace, the ask of employers, it's one of the first questions we get now as recruiters is this hybrid? Is it remote? How
Absolutely.
flexible are they? That's like one of the first questions before we even talk salary. It's crazy how that's like
Mhm.
the top of mind now. And then what I usually hear is, well, I've been working remote for 10 years, or I've been doing hybrid for 5. Going back in office is, I'd rather skip out on it, but they're going to pay you 30%
Mhm.
more above market. Well, yeah, but
Not worth it.
they do the math, right? And I think that's where the calculus of like, how much does it cost you to go into an office? The
Mhm.
clothes, the lunches, the commute time, the wear and tear on your vehicle, insurance, all that, like it adds up quite a bit.
Absolutely, it
If
does.
you're parking downtown, $200 a month just in
Mhm.
parking passes, right? Like
Yeah,
it adds
we
up.
had this happen at our household. So my husband was driving into Washington D.C.
Yeah.
With the return to work, and we recognized we did all the math because that's who I am. So I'm like, oh, we should be asking about this. I bet you can negotiate. It equated to a $5,000 a year demotion, right? Just for him to show up, and that was assuming he brought his lunch. He didn't have to pay parking. There were
That's not the
just
case
that's
for us.
not reality,
He's gonna
right?
eat at least once a week at a
Of
restaurant.
course he is. He's gonna get coffee. If there's anything he's gonna do, he's gonna get coffee, right? It was crazy, and the expectation was, well, this is just what it is. And certainly with government work, like we understand there are just expectations sometimes. But I think employers have sort of forgotten the costs that are incurred by someone to show up in office. Again, totally okay if that's what you want to do with your company. I'll never throw shade if somebody says that's what we want to do. And I'll say you have to acknowledge that you're going to be making a trade-off. You're going to lose good talent, and you should really be thinking at that point about what are the perks, right? Are you going to offer lunch once a week, or what can you do to make this as doable as possible? Can you make it so that people can leave at 3 o'clock and be able to be home when their kids get home? What is it that you can do to make this as flexible as possible? Because that is what employees are looking for. Those knowledge workers got used to that in 2021, and they still require that. And they actually were more productive for you. We saw record profits, so we know that it worked well. So, how can you work with them to create that? And that includes all of your systems and process and your tools. If you've made it really difficult to collaborate offline, then yeah, it's going to be hard when people are remote. But if you've given everyone the tools that they need, it can actually be incredibly helpful for everyone, including your bottom line.
Yeah, and I've noticed that too with people that were going to the office and whatnot, and they were thinking about what are we going to be doing. It's different in terms of like their day to day. How what kind of flexibility can we offer? But I think it's generational to some extent. Like I know the older generation, their view of work was, you show up 9 to 5, you got to be there. It was very much like a mentality of the employer being in the power position. I think that was very much the view in the past of like, do what your boss says and don't complain. And be happy you have a job. Like that was that
Yeah,
old school mentality, which, my parents' generation kind of, you got to be a good
absolutely.
employee and be dedicated and so on. But I think there's been a generational shift, maybe with expectation about work, but then there's also been the social contract between work and people. And I think that's what's
Yes,
changed dramatically, right? Like my father's generation, they would work with a company for 30 years, get a pension, retire,
right.
have a very good livable wage, afford a home and two cars, the whole thing.
Hmm.
Now with inflation and cost of living, and even just people changing jobs like every 2 3 years is the norm now, that whole social contract has changed. And so I think we have to realign with what people are expecting now, especially Gen Zers coming
Hmm.
in, which is their mentality of things is completely different from the past. Like
Yes,
they've seen their parents work those 80-hour work weeks, and they want more flexibility, work-life balance, all these beautiful things that are more important to them than just salary, having a values-based company to work for, things like that, where
absolutely.
if you're stuck in that older mindset, let's say, or a traditional mindset, let's put it as, you can be a little bit flat-footed with attracting talent now from a
Yes,
viewpoint of, okay, these 35-year-old or 30-year-old person now they haven't started a family because they've been working so hard and they want to be able
right.
to do one. So if they're starting to think about it, having that flexibility with your company allows them to say, okay, I can be here longer and not as
Absolutely.
soon as my wife gives birth next,
Exactly. It's
I'm going to have to leave as there's no flex on.
right. Well, and I think there's been this conversation happening in the business community around like we can't do that and keep profits, as high. And the reality is you're right. You can't. Profits may be a little bit leaner or maybe they're going to be the same for a little while. But wouldn't you rather again, and this is, circling back to our point about building the right process, wouldn't you rather pause right now, change your model, rebuild a little bit, re-engineer a little bit, and have something that is sustainable moving forward? So maybe that looks like providing some housing benefit or some childcare benefit. Maybe that means, paying a little bit above 50th percentile. Maybe that looks like having a remote first culture. Maybe that looks like, birthing support. There are so many things you can do to support your employees. And you do have to rethink the way that we've always treated work. We can build a new model. We just have to build a new model, right? It's not like we don't have the tools, but we have to stop and do it and be really intentional about that. And I'll say that's one reason I'm really excited to have my own organization, because I can say, no, we're going to do it differently. Like, tell me whatever you want about leaving money on the table, or, you could do so much more. That's fine. My goal is building community with my team and making sure that they are supported and they have what they need, because that used to be what business was for, right? The contract that your parents and my parents and certainly our grandparents had with their employer was a pension and activities for the family and getting off at a, predictable hour, and they really had those social supports that we do not have. That doesn't mean we can't have them. It means somebody's made an active choice to remove them, which means it's just as easy, though potentially costly, right? There's always a trade off, to build a system that allows for that. And I can do that in a private company. I can say, well, I don't care if it's silly to give everybody a, really nice birthday gift. I'm doing it because I like birthdays. Whatever that looks like for your organization, you can build that.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that sometimes is overlooked is like retention rates for companies, how
Hmm.
much you can improve your retention by doing these kind of things. Like onboarding is a simple thing of improving retention and new candidate experience to coming in, right, as a new employee. Like there's some things you can do that are not that costly as people may think, that can have a big impact for retention, talent acquisition, being able to attract better talent.
Absolutely.
It very much has become super competitive in the space, especially considering that now you're not just competing with like employers in your state, let's say. You're
Right.
competing with
The whole
employers
world.
across the whole world because, I know companies in that have hired, multinationals that are doing, multinational hiring now. you can have an employer of record, H1 visas and stuff. Now they're trying to block the visas, but the thing is, they can still work as an employer of record as a
Absolutely.
consultant. There's ways around it. People will
Mhm.
find ways around it. And so you're competing on a global stage now for talent. And I think companies need
Absolutely.
to really sharpen their pencil a little bit, because you're going to lose out to a competitor that may be not even in your country, that's offering better benefits, better flexibility, competitive pay, and so on. And that's why we're trying to have these conversations, right? To say, look, it's all about having the right talent in your company, because that's what's going to grow it, not, how much you saved on, X, Y, and Z that you did, right? Like, I think it's people that move the mountains in companies, right? It's the people
Absolutely. And if you're not building with those people in mind, you are losing. I mean, we did a comp study for a client recently and showed that it cost them $8,000 every time they had to hire somebody new. That wasn't just to lose someone, that was an additional cost. Hiring someone took $8,000 and then losing someone took even more money. And I said, I recognize it's expensive to, spend some time really building your onboarding, but if you did and you could avoid this in the future, you'd save a lot more money. So to your point, like, yeah, sharpen your pencil, do the whole math worksheet, not just the front, right? Do the whole thing and really be able to recognize that you are losing talent, you are losing opportunity, because talent, I mean, ultimately in a company, talent is all that matters, right? We can talk about AI all we want, and maybe it will get to the point where it takes all of our jobs. We are not seeing that at this point. Even Anthropic is still hiring graphic designers and data scientists and coders, so like we know that it's really not if they're not cutting those people yet. If you want to be competitive, you really have to think about all of the supports for your organization, and you have to think of it at the beginning. Like, it's much better for a company to start thinking about this in pre-seed than it is to be an incumbent and then have to change everything you do. It's really hard. That's a hard ship to turn.
Yeah, no, I can completely agree with that. It's being mindful of just the true costs associated with what we're doing, and like seeing the big picture, I think sometimes. And
Mhm.
I think it's also just being open to like change management, and having like the amount of change that we've seen in industry has been huge,
Mhm.
right? Like, there's the AI revolution, but there's also just being able to change how we work, when we work.
Mhm.
All those things can come into play. And yeah, it's for someone that's like very traditional, let's say, and if you running a company for many years, it can be very hard to do that. Like, I can
Absolutely.
understand it completely. It's like, well, it's always worked well this way, let's keep doing it.
Right. Yeah.
I've heard
And
that many
the
times.
reality is, it is working well. The question is, what's the opportunity cost? Right. Just like I can say, well, I'm doing just fine right now with only working out 3 times a week. Sure, you are. Good job. That's wonderful. What's the opportunity cost of not working out 4 overtime? It could be significant. So you have to consider all those things. And I think that's where having another set of eyes, whether it's a recruiting firm, whether it's a fractional COO, somebody to come in and say, have you ever thought about it this way? I know that benefits me in my business. I am not a marketing and sales whiz. It's just not my thing. I wish I was. I literally named the framework free. I mean, come on, like, this is not brilliance. It is incredibly impactful to have another set of eyes on what you're doing, just to give you a new perspective.
Well, we'll end on that note, because I think we can probably talk the whole afternoon about these kind of things. It's very interesting topics for sure.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you today.